What happens when Hollywood's most charismatic comeback story meets late-night television's sharpest wit, and neither one is willing to back down? The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was supposed to be just another promotional stop for Robert Downey Jr., another chance to charm audiences while plugging his latest project. Instead, it became the most explosive interview in recent memory, a verbal chess match that escalated into something nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this shocking confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us which celebrity interview moment caught you most off guard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail of what went down in that studio. The evening started like any other taping. Colbert's audience was buzzing with anticipation, knowing they were about to witness the man who brought Tony Stark to life, in conversation with one of comedy's most incisive minds. Downey walked onto the stage with his trademark swagger, that confident smile that had charmed millions of fans worldwide. He settled into the guest chair with practiced ease, adjusting his perfectly tailored jacket as the applause died down. Colbert opened with his usual playful energy, but there was something different in his demeanor tonight. Perhaps it was the weight of recent industry controversies, or maybe he sensed an opportunity to dig deeper than the typical promotional fluff. Whatever it was, the host came prepared for more than just casual banter. The first few minutes proceeded normally enough. They discussed Downey's latest film, touched on his journey from troubled actor to Marvel superstar, the usual talking points that audiences expected. But Colbert's questions carried an edge, a subtle probing that suggested he wasn't content with rehearsed answers and polished anecdotes. Downey, ever the professional, navigated the early questions with his characteristic blend of wit and deflection. He cracked jokes about his past, made self-deprecating comments about his ego, and delivered the kind of quotable sound bites that would normally make for perfect social media clips. The audience laughed on cue, everything seeming to flow according to script. But then Colbert shifted gears. He leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more serious as he broached a topic that everyone knew was sensitive territory. The question hung in the air for a moment, the studio's energy shifting palpably, as Downey's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. It started with a seemingly innocent inquiry about responsibility and influence in Hollywood. Colbert, known for his political commentary and social awareness, began exploring the intersection of entertainment and real-world impact. The questions grew more pointed, more personal, touching on themes of privilege, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with massive cultural influence. Downey's responses became more guarded, his trademark charm giving way to visible tension. The easy rapport between host and guest began to crack, as Colbert pressed harder, refusing to accept surface-level answers. What had begun as a standard promotional interview was transforming into something much more confrontational. The turning point came when Colbert brought up specific incidents from Downey's past, not just the well-documented struggles with addiction that had become part of his redemption narrative, but deeper questions about choices, consequences, and whether true accountability had ever really been achieved. The host's tone remained professional, but his intent was unmistakable. He wasn't going to let his guest hide behind charm and carefully crafted talking points. Downey's body language shifted dramatically. The relaxed posture disappeared, replaced by a defensive stance that longtime observers of the actor had rarely seen in public settings. His responses became shorter, more clipped, the easy flow of conversation grinding to a halt as both men recognized they had entered dangerous territory. The audience sensed the change immediately. The comfortable laughter died away, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch longer with each exchange. Camera operators adjusted their positions, sensing that something significant was unfolding, something that would be replayed and analyzed for days to come. Colbert, to his credit, didn't back down. If anything, he seemed energized by the resistance, pushing harder into topics that most hosts would have carefully avoided. He questioned not just Downey's past actions, but his current positions, his public statements, and the gap between his public persona and private realities. The verbal sparring intensified with each exchange. Downey, known for his quick wit and ability to deflect uncomfortable situations with humor, found himself genuinely challenged in a way that caught him off guard. His usual arsenal of charm and self-deprecation wasn't working, and the frustration was becoming increasingly visible. What made the situation even more volatile was that both men were operating at the top of their respective games. Colbert's years of political satire and hard-hitting commentary had honed his ability to cut through pretense and expose uncomfortable truths. Downey's decades in Hollywood had given him a masterful understanding of public relations and image management. The collision of these two skill sets created a perfect storm of confrontation. The questions kept coming, each one more pointed than the last. Colbert explored themes of privilege, responsibility, and authenticity with surgical precision, while Downey struggled to maintain his composure under an assault unlike anything he had experienced in a promotional setting. The careful balance of a typical late-night interview had completely collapsed, replaced by something raw and unpredictable. As the tension reached a breaking point, it became clear that neither man was willing to yield ground. Colbert had committed to his line of questioning, recognizing perhaps that this was a moment of genuine journalistic significance. Downey, meanwhile, found himself in an impossible position, unable to simply walk away from the conversation but equally unable to provide the kind of answers that would satisfy his interrogator. The stage was set for an explosion that would leave both men and everyone watching fundamentally changed by what was about to unfold. The breaking point came with a question that cut deeper than anything that had come before. Colbert, his voice steady but his eyes locked on his guest, asked about the difference between public redemption and private reckoning. He wanted to know if Downey truly believed that success and acclaim could erase the impact of past choices, or if it simply provided a more comfortable platform from which to avoid real accountability. Downey's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face flushed, his jaw tightened, and for the first time in the interview, his famous composure completely cracked. He leaned forward in his chair, pointing directly at Colbert, his voice rising as he accused the host of ambushing him under the guise of entertainment. This wasn't journalism, he declared. This was character assassination dressed up as late-night television. The audience sat in stunned silence as Downey's voice echoed through the studio. He demanded to know what gave Colbert the right to sit in judgment, to psychoanalyze his life choices and moral development for the entertainment of millions. His words came fast and angry, each sentence more heated than the last as years of carefully controlled public relations finally gave way to raw, unfiltered emotion. Colbert didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed to welcome the authentic response, the first genuine moment in what had been an increasingly artificial exchange. He calmly responded that accountability wasn't about judgment, it was about honesty. He suggested that perhaps the real issue wasn't the questions being asked, but the reluctance to engage with them meaningfully. This response only fueled Downey's anger further. He stood up from his chair, towering over the seated host, his voice now carrying across the entire studio as he accused Colbert of hiding behind the shield of comedy and social commentary to launch personal attacks. He questioned whether the host had ever faced real consequences for his own choices, whether he had ever had to rebuild his life from nothing while the entire world watched and waited for him to fail again. The personal nature of the attack clearly struck home. Colbert's professional demeanor wavered for the first time, his own voice taking on an edge as he fired back that redemption required more than just career success and public applause. He challenged Downey to explain how someone moves from destruction to inspiration without ever truly grappling with the wreckage left behind. The exchange escalated beyond anything anyone in the studio had ever witnessed. Downey accused Colbert of exploiting his past struggles for entertainment value, of turning personal trauma into late-night comedy material. He demanded to know if this was how the host treated all his guests, or if he reserved special cruelty for those who had dared to overcome their worst moments and find success again. Colbert's response was swift and cutting. He pointed out that public figures who profit from their redemption stories should be prepared to discuss them honestly, not just when it serves their promotional needs. He suggested that perhaps the real issue was that Downey had become so accustomed to controlling his narrative that any genuine scrutiny felt like an attack. The verbal warfare continued to escalate, with both men now fully committed to a battle that had moved far beyond the original scope of a promotional interview. Downey accused Colbert of moral grandstanding, of using his platform to tear down rather than build up. He questioned whether the host had ever created anything meaningful or simply made a career of criticizing those who had. Colbert countered by challenging the very notion of Downey's expertise on creation versus criticism. He pointed out that accountability and self-reflection were themselves forms of creation, building better versions of ourselves and more honest relationships with the world around us. He suggested that perhaps the actor's discomfort came from being asked to engage in that creative process publicly. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness what was clearly becoming television history. Camera operators continued filming, recognizing that they were capturing something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the carefully choreographed dance between celebrity and media that usually defined these interactions. Downey's anger reached a crescendo as he accused Colbert of cowardice, of hiding behind his desk and his writers and his audience to launch attacks he would never have the courage to make in a private conversation. He demanded to know if this was entertainment or therapy, and who had appointed Colbert as his analyst without his consent. The host's response was perhaps the most devastating of the entire exchange. He calmly stated that the questions weren't therapy, they were journalism, and that public figures who built careers on personal transformation should expect to discuss that transformation honestly. He added that perhaps the real question wasn't about his right to ask, but about Downey's willingness to answer. This final exchange pushed Downey beyond his breaking point. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper as he told Colbert that he had crossed a line, that there was a difference between accountability and public humiliation. He accused the host of using his platform to settle scores and boost ratings at the expense of human dignity. The tension in the studio was now palpable, with audience members shifting uncomfortably in their seats and crew members exchanging nervous glances. What had begun as a standard celebrity interview had transformed into something far more raw and unpredictable, a genuine confrontation between two powerful personalities with fundamentally different views of responsibility and redemption. Colbert made one final attempt to redirect the conversation, suggesting that perhaps they could find common ground in their shared commitment to honesty and growth. But Downey was beyond reconciliation. His trust had been broken, his boundaries violated, and his carefully maintained public persona had been shattered in front of millions of viewers. The actor's final words before the ultimate confrontation were delivered with quiet intensity that somehow carried more weight than all his previous shouting. He told Colbert that he had misjudged not just the interview, but the man conducting it. He had expected challenging questions, even uncomfortable ones, but he had not expected a deliberate attempt to humiliate and diminish him under the guise of meaningful dialogue. The stage was now set for the moment that would define both men's careers, the explosive climax that no one in that studio would ever forget. What happened next will go down as one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. Colbert, perhaps sensing that he had pushed too far, but unable to resist one final probe, made a comment that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. He suggested that maybe the real issue wasn't the questions themselves, but the fact that after all these years, after all the success and acclaim, Downey still couldn't face them without anger. The words hit Downey like a physical blow. His entire body went rigid, his face cycling through a series of emotions before settling on something cold and dangerous. For a moment, the studio fell into complete silence, the kind of quiet that makes everyone hold their breath because they know something irreversible is about to happen. Then Downey spoke, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow audible throughout the entire studio. He told Colbert that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, that he had confused his role as an entertainer with some kind of moral authority he had never earned and didn't deserve. The actor's words carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone present, a gravity that made it clear this was no longer about interview techniques or promotional strategies. Colbert, realizing perhaps that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, attempted to defuse the situation. He suggested they take a commercial break, give everyone a chance to reset, and find a more constructive path forward. But Downey was beyond such diplomatic solutions. He had been pushed past his limit, and there was no walking back from where they now found themselves. The actor began to pace behind his chair, his movements sharp and agitated as he processed what had just transpired. He accused Colbert of betrayal, of violating the basic trust that should exist between interviewer and subject. He pointed out that he had come on the show in good faith, expecting challenging but fair questions about his work and his career, not a public dissection of his character and moral development. The host tried to interject, to explain that his questions were about accountability and growth, themes that should be fair game for any public figure who had built a career on personal transformation. But Downey cut him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and final. He had heard enough explanations, enough justifications for what he now viewed as a calculated attack disguised as journalism. What followed was a moment of television unlike anything viewers had ever witnessed. Downey turned to face the camera, directly bypassing Colbert entirely, as he addressed the audience with an intensity that was both magnetic and unsettling. He spoke about the difference between earning redemption and having it granted by others, about the courage it takes to rebuild a life while the world watches and judges every step. His words were powerful and deeply personal, delivered with the kind of raw honesty that had been notably absent from the earlier, more defensive portions of the interview. For a brief moment it seemed like perhaps this confrontation might lead to something meaningful, a breakthrough that would justify all the discomfort and tension that had preceded it. But then Colbert made another critical error. Unable to resist the opportunity presented by Downey's moment of vulnerability, he pressed again, suggesting that perhaps this was exactly the kind of honesty that had been missing from their conversation all along. He implied that maybe the anger and defensiveness had been preventing the kind of authentic dialogue that could actually serve the audience. The suggestion that his emotional response was somehow inauthentic, that his anger was a barrier to real communication rather than a legitimate reaction to being ambushed, proved to be the final straw. Downey's face transformed, his expression shifting from hurt to fury to something approaching contempt. He looked at Colbert with genuine disgust, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. The actor's voice when he spoke again was different, controlled but seething with barely contained rage. He told Colbert that he had just witnessed something genuine and real, something that came from years of actual struggle and growth, and his response was to immediately weaponize it for his show. He accused the host of being incapable of recognizing authentic human emotion when it didn't serve his entertainment purposes. Downey began removing his microphone with deliberate, measured movements that somehow conveyed more threat than any shouting could have achieved. Each action was precise and final, performed with the kind of ceremonial gravity that made it clear this wasn't a momentary tantrum, but a definitive statement. The wireless pack came off next, placed carefully on the chair he would never occupy. Again, the audience watched in stunned fascination as one of Hollywood's biggest stars systematically disconnected himself from the show's technical apparatus. There was something both deeply personal and utterly professional about the way he handled each piece of equipment. As if even in his fury he maintained enough respect for the crew to avoid damaging their gear. Colbert made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. He stood up from behind his desk, moving toward Downey with his hands raised in a gesture of reconciliation. He began to speak about misunderstandings and the possibility of starting over, but his words fell on deaf ears. Downey had moved beyond anger into something colder and more resolute. The actor turned to face Colbert one final time, and what he said next became the quote that would be replayed endlessly across social media and news programs for weeks to come. He told the host that he had confused cynicism with wisdom, judgment with insight, and entertainment with enlightenment. He said that Colbert had just learned the difference between interviewing someone and trying to destroy them, and that he hoped the lesson was worth the cost. Then came the moment that would define the entire encounter. Downey looked directly into the main camera, his gaze steady and unwavering, and delivered a statement that was part farewell, part warning, and part prophecy. He said that authenticity couldn't be manufactured or manipulated, that real growth happened in private moments of struggle and self-reflection, not in public performances designed to satisfy other people's need for confession and absolution. His final words to the audience were delivered with a mixture of sadness and resolve that made them all the more powerful. He told them that they deserved better than entertainment that fed on human frailty, that reduced complex personal journeys to simple narratives of sin and redemption. He suggested that perhaps it was time to expect more from their media, more honesty about the difference between genuine accountability and public spectacle. The walk to the exit was performed with the kind of dignity that only someone who had truly overcome adversity could muster. Downey didn't storm off in a rage or dramatic gesture. Instead, he moved with purpose and grace, nodding to crew members he passed, maintaining his composure even as the weight of what had just transpired settled over the entire studio. Colbert remained frozen behind his desk, seemingly unable to process what had just occurred. The host, who had built his career on quick wit and sharp responses, found himself speechless, watching helplessly as his guest departed with a finality that made any attempt at reconciliation impossible. The studio door closed behind Downey with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo throughout the space. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable, broken only by the quiet hum of equipment and the barely audible whispers of audience members trying to process what they had just witnessed. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Colbert's struggle to regain his composure and continue with the show. But everyone present knew that what had just transpired would overshadow anything else that might happen that evening. They had witnessed something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the carefully maintained boundaries between entertainment and authentic human emotion. In the days that followed, the interview would be dissected frame by frame, with experts and commentators weighing in on everything from interview ethics to celebrity accountability to the responsibilities of public figures. But for those who were there that night, what they would remember most was not the analysis or the aftermath, but the raw power of two strong personalities colliding with such force that something fundamental was broken in the process. The question that would haunt everyone involved was whether what they had witnessed was genuine journalism, pushing important boundaries, or entertainment that had crossed the line into something darker and more exploitative. The answer, like so many truths revealed under pressure, would prove to be far more complicated than anyone expected. So what do you think? Did Stephen Colbert cross the line that night? Or was Robert Downey Jr. simply unable to handle the kind of tough questions that come with celebrity status? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments that you won't see anywhere else.